Chapter the 20th. "Tish," I said, opening the carriage door that faced away from the asylum. "The others are not here. They must have gotten lost. We must retreat." "I'll do nothing of the kind." It seemed as if Tish, in playing the part of her angry twin, had seriously taken on a shoe-throwing sort of personality. "I'm going in there. I'm going to see my sister." "But Tish, you can't." Trying to decide on a plan of action, I was reasoning backwards from the worst thing that could happen. Tish herself being committed as a lunatic. "They won't let Flossie go on just your say-so." "They know Lady Felicity as Nora," volunteered Dawson, observing us eagerly yet placidly, as if seated in a theater. "Mrs. Nora Helmer." "She's lost her name?" Tish sounded dazed. "Nora Helmer," I exclaimed. Evidently, Caddy had been to see the latest controversial play, A Doll's House, and had chosen a unique way to mock its heroine. "How fiendish!" "Tish, how can you possibly expect—" Heatedly, she cut me off. "I have not come this close to finding my sister in order to hesitate. You know where she is. Go for help." Afoot, in this isolated place, with no idea which way to turn. If being committed was the worst that could happen to Tish, being stranded was the worst that could happen to me. Yet I could hardly ride along in the carriage back to Dunhenge Hall, could I? Nor could Tish, for that matter. Somehow I must keep both her and myself out of harm's way. "Tish, hush," she ordered, urgently gesturing for me to leave. She must have seen, as I did, the swaying light of a lantern moving towards us. I backed away, closing the carriage door as quietly as I could. But I knew I would not do what Tish wanted of me. I could not simply abandon her in the asylum. Only one other option occurred to me, involving swift action and surprise. But luckily, the coachman had no reason to beware of me. Indeed, he had no idea I existed. Reaching the carriage, he opened the door and spoke to Dawson. Edging around the back of the carriage towards him, I heard his bewildered voice. "They say Mrs. Nora Helmer ain't run off at all. She's right there in her ward where she belong." "That's right." Dawson sounded ever so smug. "This one here is her twin sister." Peeking out of my hiding place, I saw the man gawking like a fish. I also surveyed his surroundings and made a useful observation. "So what am I supposed to do?" the coachman appealed. "The Earl wants her committed just the same," said Dawson, to my scowling disapproval. Evidently, Dawson was a weather vane of a woman, taking sides as the wind blew. But that's awful serious, especially as she ain't the right one." "What other choice do you have? Adopt her, you and her wife?" Tish said impatiently, "Just call me Mrs. Lynde and take me in there." Tish had not yet ceased to surprise me. Mrs. Lynde was the name of Nora Helmer's friend and confidant in A Doll's House. The coachman coughed in the hesitating manner known as hem and haw. "Well?" Tish put one foot on the step to get out of the carriage. He reached out a hand to assist her. I charged. Gentle reader, please bear in mind that, while not weighty, I am tall and strong, and I lanced into them like a battering ram. In less time than it takes for me to tell it, I knocked them both sprawling. Tish back into the carriage on her posterior, and the coachman similarly into a formidable rosebush. "Enola!" Tish cried. "I will never forgive you. Never!" That hurt enough to make me bite my lip as I shut the carriage door on her and darted onward, swarming up the carriage as if it were a tree, seizing the reins from where the coachman had secured them, grabbing the whip and lashing the horses. They sprang forward, and at the same time, not at all coincidentally, I sat down hard on the coachman's bench. I kept the presence of mind to ply the reins so that the plunging horses stayed on the drive. The carriage slewed and swayed its way around the turning, and we sped back in the direction from which we had come. I heard the coachman swearing and snapping thorny branches as he struggled to get up from the rosebush, and to my satisfaction, his curses faded away, left behind. I started tugging on the reins and addressing the horses in soothing tones, telling them they could cease galloping now. My lucky fates be praised that the Cleveland Bays, scions of a fine old breed, proved to be far more civilized than Jezebel. By the time we reached the end of the drive, I had slowed them to a trot, and I reined them in even more to accomplish the turn onto the road at a walk. Otherwise, I might have upset the carriage, especially as I could only see by the lights of its lanterns. But I very much feared Tish might jump out when we slowed down. As soon as I could, I clicked my tongue and snapped the whip to send the horses once more into a smart trot. We whirled along for a few miles when our road ended at a thoroughfare. I had no idea which way to turn, but in this case, she who hesitated might have a mutiny on her hands. Slowing the horses to a walk, I took a quick glance to the left, at darkness, then to the right, where I saw a hint of a light. Peering through trees, I thought it could have been sizable, but quite distant. Or closer, but quite small. Indeed, I had no idea what was its source, but it hardly mattered. Lost in the night, like a moth, I turned towards the light, urging the horses into a trot again. As we rounded a gentle curve in the highway, I saw it more clearly. Not so far away from us, I saw it move. Then felt a bolt of fear straighten my spine, for I now perceived the light to be a lantern held by a man blocking our road. A robber? I could not turn such a large, clumsy thing as a carriage to flee him. I saw no way past him, and the only other choice seemed to be to run over him. "Hallo there," he called, swinging the lantern. At the sound of his voice, recognition took my breath away. I could not muster speech to answer him as I reined in the horses. Not knowing who I was, he strode forward, lifting his lantern to have a look at me. Voice pitched about an octave above his normal tone, he exclaimed, "Enola?" "Hello, Sherlock. What happened?" Foolish question, for, stopping the carriage, I could see what had happened. The wagonette swooned in the ditch beside the road, with its wheels spinning awry while Tukey and Watson surveyed it forlornly. As for Jezebel, she was notable only by her absence, and by the damage she had wrought. "What happened?" Sherlock mimicked. "I should ask you what happened. Why are you driving this carriage when we both know you cannot drive?" I had no chance to retort, for the carriage doors opened. Tish and Dawson stepped out. Dawson carrying her now nearly spent candle. "Enola Holmes!" cried Tish, her words choked by wrath and tears. "I shall hate you forever unless we go back there and get my sister straight away." "Well," said Sherlock, "we can't have her hating you forever, can we?" A short time later, when we once more drove into the lesser Smythe-Nuncle Sanatorium for imbeciles and mental defectives, our carriage lamps were not the only illumination. Several persons, both male and female, clustered out front holding lanterns. Their interest centered upon a rampantly gesticulating individual. "That's the coachman," I explained to Sherlock, who was riding up on the box with me, having helped me get the carriage turned around. I had to shove him into the clutches of a big rose bush, or he would have taken Tish inside. I thought I heard Sherlock chuckle, but could not be sure, because the coachman came running towards us, shouting, "You thief! I'll have the law on you! Robbery, assault, and battery!" "Poppycock, do please calm down, my good man." Alighting from the carriage with his usual energy and air of command, Sherlock offhandedly gave the coachman a folded note, specifically a Bank of England note. Its denomination I can only surmise, but it was sufficient to calm the coachman instantly. "And you, my good lad?" My brother addressed a stable boy who was prepared to mount a cob, presumably to go summon the local constabulary. "All will soon be settled. Put your nag away." The youngster did so without question, and Sherlock turned to the others, who were staring not only at him but at me, securing the reins and descending, shockingly and unmistakably female, from the box, and at the odd assortment of people emerging from the carriageway. Watson, with the black bag of a doctor, Tukey all dressed up, like a dandy, Dawson, stout and humble and enjoying herself, and Tish, with various colors of grease paint smeared all over her face from her efforts to remove it. But all eyes turned to Sherlock when he spoke. "Who is the proprietor of this establishment?" "I, sir, Roland Mizzlethorpe, M.D., most humbly at your service." A peculiar sort of concave man stepped forward, long of face, hollow of chest, obsequious of manner. "And you are?" "It does not matter. You will be dealing with Dr. Watson." The man's eyes fairly bugged out, flashing white like those of a frightened horse, as he slewed them towards Watson. Evidently he recognized the name. I assumed from Watson's fame as my brother's chronicler, but I was mistaken. Watson told him, I am here on behalf of a patient you call Nora Helmer, although I am sure you know quite well that is not her real name. Her sister has intervened for her, and we wish her to be released immediately." Dawson, I noticed, tangentially, had somehow obtained a wet handkerchief and was helping Tish scrub her face with it. Mizzlethorpe visibly tottered between surrender and resistance for a moment, during which he delayed response by violently motioning his people to go back inside the sanatorium. Once the onlookers were gone, he stiffened. "On what grounds?" "Come, come, my man, you know as well as I do that she does not belong here," scoffed Watson. But Sherlock had reached a more shrewd assessment of Mizzlethorpe. "We wish to see her commitment papers." "No." Again the man spooked like a horse. "Ah, they are irregular." Then Sherlock remarked to Watson, "Old chap, I will bet you a dinner at Simpson's that yours is the name signed to them. Lord Caddy seems to have got it off a list. He must not be much of a reader." Dr. Mizzlethorpe entreated, "Gentlemen, please, I am sure we all wish to prevent scandal of any sort." An imperious voice spoke. "Then I want my sister. Now." Tish stood, a lone, lance-straight figure, in the shadowy light of lanterns, and all three men turned to stare at her as if a pilaster had spoken. Then they put their heads together and muttered. Off to one side, Tukey was conferring with a coachman as Dawson picked thorns out of him. With no one else near, I went to stand by Tish and take her hand. She welcomed me with a wan smile. Evidently she had forgotten that she hated me and was never going to forgive me. The grip of her hand on mine tightened as the men began to move. Sherlock, Watson, and the Pecksniffian asylum doctor walked off and went inside. But as the front door of the asylum closed behind them, Tish made no attempt to follow them. Perhaps she understood that she had done all she could, or perhaps she could not bear to see where her sister had been kept. Perhaps she felt weak, and no wonder, as she had not eaten all day. She did not speak. She stood like a pillar of the Parthenon, but I could feel her trembling. We stood hand in hand for what seemed like a long time, before at last the door opened again. Tish gave a low, wordless cry, dropped my hand, and ran, or stumbled, into her sister's arms. They hugged, they wept, and she, Tish, looked far more pitiful than Flossie did. Beautiful Flossie, her long hair untended but only a little bit unkempt, her lovely face, mirror image of her sister's, pale but not thin, her dress dark and plain but whole. Embracing, the sisters gazed at each other's faces, then each sobbed upon the other's shoulder. Then they gazed again. "Tish, your hair!" Flossie exclaimed. "It'll grow back," said Tish with a smile, the warmest, widest smile I had ever seen on her, now that her troubles were over. Coming out of the asylum directly after Flossie, my brother and Watson stood smiling, as I dare say I was smiling myself, looking on. Flossie was telling Tish, "It was not so bad, only that I could not sleep at night for all the screaming going on, and I saw the most awful things, and I could not cease brooding over Caddy, his infidelities, how he had doomed me for not being complacent, and how dare he summon the Black Barouche for me." I noticed Tukey had come over to speak with Sherlock, who nodded, then said to everyone in general, "The coachman has agreed to drive. Come, we must be going." Flossie flung up her head in alarm. "Where are you taking me?" "To the Dorking train station," Sherlock said. "To live with me," Tish told her. "Oh, Tish, truly?" "Of course." "But I'm frightened. Can we keep Caddy away from me?" "Leave that to me and my brother," I said. Flossie turned her lovely, shadowed eyes on me, their question unspoken. "Who are you?" "This is my cherished friend, Enola Holmes," said Tish with a fervor that warmed my heart. "And my brother is Sherlock Holmes," I told Flossie. "It is incumbent upon us to visit the Earl of Dunhenge on your behalf. If, in his obstinacy, his cadship should wish to reclaim you, we will threaten him with scandal. He has falsely represented you as deceased, so we can hold the fear of the law over his head. I feel quite hopeful that we can persuade him to provide you with a handsome monetary settlement. Is that not so, Sherlock?" "It might perhaps be possible," he replied. His tone was annoyingly that of a more cautious older brother, but I didn't mind. I knew very well what I could do, indeed, what I quite intended to do. So you need not feel in any way apprehensive, I assured Lady Felicity. We will take care of everything.